Vladimir Putin recently claimed victory as Russia's president, despite extensive evidence that the election was illegitimate in a number of ways. His repression, including evidence of state-ordered assassinations and assassination attempts, and his manipulation of Russia's legal system and institutions, seems to assure him power and impunity. Putin's efforts to consolidate that power have included eliminating most political opposition and civil society organizations, and forcing independent media to shut down or move their operations into exile. The recent death of opposition leader Alexei Navalny in a remote prison camp exemplified the threats to anyone deemed critical of the Kremlin. The long arm of the Kremlin also extends far beyond its borders. In addition to the now decade-long war in Ukraine, which escalated into a full-scale invasion in February 2022, and military interventions in the Middle East and Africa, Russian exiles are also not immune from Putin's wrath. This is the Just Security Podcast. I'm your host, Paras Shah. Co-hosting with me this episode is Just Security's Washington senior editor, Viola Ganger. Viola recently interviewed Gleb Bogush, a Russian lawyer and expert on international criminal law, who fled Russia in 2022. This conversation took place a day before the March 22nd terrorist attack on a Moscow concert hall that killed more than 130 people.
Gleb Bogush is postdoctoral research fellow at the Center of Excellence for International Courts of the University of Copenhagen. He is also a member of the Cologne Bonn Academy in Exile in Germany. Before 2022, he was an associate professor of international law at the Moscow State University and HSE University in Russia, also known as the Higher School of Economics. Gleb, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your story, your life in Russia before you fled briefly, and how and when you decided to leave, and your life since then.
Yeah, I had a very boring life of academic. I graduated from Moscow State University. I made my PhD studies there, and then I worked for more than 15 years as associate professor in two Moscow universities. I also used to teach across Russia and even abroad. And my specialization was international criminal law. I never thought that it would be so close to my real life. I think I did a lot of good things in educating students. Quite recently in Washington, D.C., and not far from Russian embassy, I met a couple of students who asked me, have you by chance taught anything in Moscow State University? And it was very impressive to meet former students. And I think we did many good things during this time. In particular, we popularized international criminal law. We had moot court competition in Russian on the ICC. I was one of the member of the group which prepared the draft law on international crimes to implement ICC statute. That never happened, unfortunately, in Russia. And there was a lot of hopes that one day Russia would continue the good tradition, actually, to promote international law, and including international criminal law. Russia was one of the pioneers of international humanitarian law at the turn of 19th, 20th century. And it was also Soviet Union played a major role in post-war justice, in the Nuremberg trials, and recently there was the whole series of publications about the role of the Soviets. And my own scientific granddad, so the supervisor of my supervisor, was Aron Trainin, who played a critical role in preparation of the Nuremberg trials and in the judgment. And his contribution was on the crime of aggression, actually. At that time, they have been called crimes against peace. And one of my recent publications before the full war started was about his scholarship. So there was interesting time, the time of hopes, but it was increasingly difficult to work, to be honest. It was the country turned to dictatorship. little by little, step by step, we had more and more problems in our academic expression, and certain topics have become dangerous. Just to mention the historical memory, the study of the crimes of the past. We had so many cases, unfortunately, when the independent historians, independent researchers have been targeted for their studies. But of course, it was possible to work. It was possible to keep hope. And with all this, clouds that are coming around our country, we continue to believe in the peaceful future, and we continue our work. But unfortunately, the events of 2022 turned to a very different direction, and it was the end of my career. It was very, very, very sad moment.
And that was the full-scale invasion,
Yes.
Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
Yes, and this was not the first, worrying sign. To be honest, there was before was, of course, poisoning of Alexei Navalny, his arrest, the increasing repression, but it was a full-scale invasion that changed everything. Again, it was a very, very serious blow to all hope for the life. And the most important for me was an ability to work, because it's not possible for academics, for professors to work in such situation. You either have freedom or you cannot continue your mission. It's not possible.
Was there one particular sort of make-break moment when you realized you have to leave?
That was very clear from the very beginning, because there was the situation of large-scale military aggression against sovereign country, and against the country I actually had the multiple connection with. So for me, aggression against Ukraine is not just violation of international law or military exercise. It's attack of the country. But immediate trigger, I think, was the suspension of the shutting down of all media. It happened in one day. So, for example, Novaya Gazeta, Nobel Peace Prize winner, 2021, radio station Echo Moskvy, that was one of the most popular radio stations in the country. They have been shut down in one day. Why then only? And even more importantly, the Russian authorities adopted criminal laws. They criminalized actually all public expression about the war. They not just ban certain sort of statements, but even ban certain words de facto. People started to be tried and punished for calling, for example, the invasion of Ukraine to war. And we just recalled here the fate of Alexei Gorinov, who was member of the Moscow local council. Unlike Putin, he was elected. He's a lawyer. And Gorinov was punished just for words of sympathy towards Ukrainians and Ukraine, just for making very, very accurate statement about the sad events that are taking place in the war. And all these things started to happen almost during the days after the full-scale invasion. What was next was obvious. We saw that the country is turning to the isolation, and rhetoric of the authorities was quite aggressive. For those who are very, very dependent of the international exchange, imagine all states, all countries that you have connections, when you have your network, are declared to be unfriendly, and you can have consequences for cooperation. So almost all NGOs, a lot of American organizations, also German organizations, have been declared so-called undesirable organizations. So that means that every contact, every participation in the events can be potentially criminalized. So that's not the fear of being imprisoned, although it's also played a role. But the most importantly for me, the trigger was the escalation of censorship. So for me, it was a signal that you cannot just stay in such situation. Although it's rather dramatic, if not tragic. I'm very rooted in my country. I believe that the best I could do much better in my country. I love the language I speak. I love so many people in this country, and I believe in its future, and it should be free. And to agree that Russia is Putin and Russia is Putin's regime is not, and I cannot believe in that. It's not. I know that it's not true. So for me, it was a personal defeat, but at the same time, I think it was a right move, because if you can continue doing your work, you should do it. You should use all the opportunities, even if it would be an exile. It was actually interruption of my career. For every academic, it's very difficult to be downgraded from the well-established academic post to certain uncertainty. But, well, it can happen. It's another reminder that there is no stability, there is no permanency in our lives. Everything can happen, and this has happened to me, but also with a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my compatriots. So I'm not consider myself to be the larger victims of this event. Yes, I experienced. It's a very difficult experience for me, but it's not comparable with many other people in Russia, in Ukraine, and other affected countries.
Yeah. Thank you. What are you hearing from contacts back in Russia about the conditions of everyday life there and the mood after Putin's so-called re-election in that clearly illegitimate vote?
Yes, I have contacts every day. I talk to people, talking to friends, relatives, a lot of other people, not only in Moscow, but mostly there. I think the people are really frustrated by the situation. They are not able to change the situation on the ground, and this feeling of weakness is very visible, unfortunately. So people hope for certain support from outside. At least what I heard, that a lot of people have been very disappointed by the weak language used from outside. It's not only governments of the free world, which have been very, very, I would say, moderate in their assessment. Some of the language was really weak and even appeasing, but also media, how media reported. So my last conversation, for example, with the friend in Russia was that, they report about elections like it's normal elections. So that's so disappointing, and that's something that we could see. There is a continuing disengagement of people from social activity. People are afraid to express views, strong views. When a war is of course an elephant in the room, everybody understands that, but the regime makes everything possible to isolate people from the war, to make the war very remote. It especially true in the bigger cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg and some other big cities. You don't have a lot many signs of war. Just some propaganda, but not real touch with the war reality. And the people try to distance themselves from the war. An election was a clear demonstration that you cannot influence anything. So this is not a relationship of the government and citizens. It's something very, very different. It's an open war against part of the population who doesn't support Putin, especially actively. There is no chance of fair trial for them. There is no chance of the equal application of the law, even Putin's law. It's no mercy to these people. And this threatening, constant threatening and propaganda, the propaganda, it's something that doesn't stop. The investment of regime into propaganda is enormous. It's no shortage of money and all other things that propaganda works, unfortunately. Yes, there are a lot of brave people who are still there. And we could see this even on these so-called elections, that a lot of people, despite everything, took part in this action against Putin. We have again people who have been arrested for just appearing before the polling station. This resistance in Russia exists, but yes, it's a bleeding wound. It's more than 1 billion people. It's a modest estimation. Left Russia after 2022, and this continues to happen.
In light of all of those developments in that situation and the death of the leading opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, where does the Russian opposition go from here, internally and externally? What do you think are the 1 or 2 priorities that the Russian opposition should pursue at this point?
It's a huge loss. First of all, Alexei Navalny was a towering figure. It's of course difficult to survive this loss and to turn it to further action. I'm not here to speak for all the opposition, which is very diverse actually, but I would kindly suggest three priorities. So first, it should be certain, representation of Russian society by the democratically determined leadership of this opposition. It's very difficult, but it's something that lies on the surface. We hear now, for example, a lot of calls to declare Putin illegitimate, and I support these calls, to be clear. But of course, we need people who will be speaking to, not just to foreign countries, but they would be speaking to a broader audience, also in Russia and outside Russia. For example, we have, again, already millions of Russians who live outside. This is a significant audience. It's meaningful because they have this privilege of living in the free countries who have a voice, and many of them have means to talk to this audience. And I think that this is the first priority, to have structures, to have unity, and to work on creating certain structures that would have voice, would speak unified voice. It doesn't mean, creation of one dictator who will be, like Putin, say what we should do and what would be our purpose. But it's important to have certain democratic elements in this movement, and I'm sure that it's possible. Yes, we have some disagreements, but we have much more reasons to be united. Second, we need to fight for our people, to help political prisoners, to engage in dialogue with all possible states and all possible organizations to help these people, and also to be more assertive in also defending our rights. We have a situation, unfortunately, when a lot of people who are in exile, subject to double the victimization. They are persecuted by Russian authorities, but at the same time they experienced also discriminatory measures in the countries where they are. So this is something that undermines our efforts. It's weakening this society, and this is also something that we should discuss openly. It's not only about travel restrictions although it also plays a role. A lot of people have are now in the countries where Russian security services, for example, are quite active, and we have many cases in Central Asia, in Thailand, in Georgia, multiple cases. Why all these people are there? Just because the European Union member states close the borders, and they restrict, in violation of European law, by the way, restrict the very ability for Russian citizens to get visas, and they restrict their entrance with the valid visas. So it's just one example. But Russian immigrants are experiencing a lot of difficulties with every routine things like bank accounts, like social security, and I'm just can speak for the lawyers, for example. Imagine how lawyers can work with clients, everything without access to bank account, without any perspective of social security. It's quite difficult. So
just to clarify, they're confronting those situations in the West or in the countries where there are more exiles, such as in Georgia, Romanians?
Yes, they of course have this problems everywhere, and the difference is that these countries in the West, they are subject to very progressive and very serious rules on non-discrimination. But at the same time, we see this that this is happening. I'm not saying that we are subject to certain Russophobia or something like that. It's more the effect of the war, of course. So this is understandable why all these measures and why all this sentiment is spreading across the world. But what is very important, and we should work on that, Russians should work on that, we should distinguish between Putin regime and individual Russians. It also depends on us how we by our actions demonstrate that these are two groups that are very different, and it's in our interest. We're fighting for the same values, values of non-discrimination, values of freedom, values of democracy. And when Russians are excluded from this world, when we see that there are even calls for that, Russians are incapable to have democracy and rights. They should not be allowed to use the privilege of democracy. This is what unfortunately some officials from EU countries say. That is, of course, highly dangerous, and they are demotivating us. But also, it brought this region generally to the very dark. They turned the whole region to a very dark place, because if Russia will not disappear from the map of Europe, it will remain there. And I think the only way to change the situation for the better, for the whole region and for the whole world, is to change Russia. And it cannot be done without Russians, without acknowledging that this is a country and the people in this country are not the current regime. This is not what we have. There are two different groups. I'm not saying that Russian society is perfect. I'm not saying that we should not do a lot of work in our own perception of Russia and our history. That we should not have a serious work with neighbors and how we treat the neighbors. All these things are existing, unfortunately, and we have a lot of very dark chapters in our history, first of all, to deal with. But if we want to have real space of freedom, we need to have Russian people on board.
So, considering those conditions that you describe, and on the topic of Russian exiles, tell us just briefly a little bit about the issues that exiles are facing with Russia's transnational repression. What form concretely are you seeing that take? What are some of the most severe instances of that you see?
It depends on the country where Russian exiles are now. Because the relationship of Russia and the presence of Russian state is very different when we talk about, for example, some EU countries or United States, or for example, when we talk about Armenia or Kyrgyzstan. And we have a lot of situation in which Russian citizens are vulnerable. They have to contact the state. They have depended on the documents first. A lot of them have relatives and property in Russia. It's a constant threat of retaliation from the Russian authorities, and it's of course not something that can be fixed by the foreign states. It's just important to understand. And we had several cases already, unfortunately, when the people have been arrested in subject to extradition. So the fact that even now, after all these events, after escalation of repression, after the killing of Navalny, after all this terrible things, and most importantly, after the war of aggression against Ukraine, we still have a lot of states which continue to cooperate with Russia, provide Russia legal assistance. We have proud reports of Ministry of Justice, the same ministry which actually designate foreign agents, so-called foreign agents, and which is responsible for the death of Navalny, because actually the penal institutions are under Ministry of Justice. And they proudly report about extraditions from Greece, from Cyprus. There are other cases. I just mentioning EU member states, but we have unfortunately a lot of other cases when even political activists, so the person who obviously targeted because of their political views and opposition to regime, can be subject to this proceeding. So deportations, extradition, and very often we see quite collaboration between authorities of Russia and some other states where there is a massive number of Russian exiles. It's very dangerous. We currently have a case in Thailand when the whole band was arrested, and B2, it's so-called B2 band, and just by the very active intervention of Israel and the support of United States, as far as I remember, there was possible to protect them, and they finally left Thailand prison to Israel. But this case actually demonstrated the role of diplomatic mission of Russia that was closely worked with the police, Thai police, and just by chance, by the intervention and the public exposure, that it didn't happen. So Russian authorities create a constant threat to the well-being of Russian immigrants, and especially because those who are working on sensitive matters, those who are covering the war, media, lawyers who are investigating and defending victims of human rights violations, and of course those who work, who defending and who are supporting Ukraine. We have a lot of help, which is not always public, but we have a lot of people who are supporting Ukraine. Ukrainians, for example, who live in Russia. It's a very large group of potential, targets, and it's not just the prominent politicians. It's much bigger group, and we now have a lot of activities. So it's a recent case of arrest of professor, for example, in Estonia. There was Vyacheslav Morozov, who was arrested for espionage charge. But the very fact, I'm not discussing the case because we don't know, and he's presumed innocent, but the very case, shows that Russian intelligence targeting also academic institutions, So it's not a safe place anymore.
You mean academia is not a safe
Yes.
place necessarily anymore?
Necessarily,
Yeah.
no, because they target people who also have access to the broader exile community. So that's unfortunately what is happening. So yes, there is no safety. It's illusion, I think, to think that when you physically leave the country, you are safe. There is no such thing, unfortunately. But at the same time, I can say for myself, I'm very grateful for the country I live now, so that I can work. I can speak freely without fear that I will be immediately subject to prosecution in any form. Actually, it's not always criminal prosecution. It can be other ways to influence people and to silence them.
Well, and there was the case recently, of course, of the defector who was killed in Spain. And there have been cases of poisonings, correct? Those are some of the most egregious cases. In that vein, what do you see right now that the United States and the West can particularly do to help both what is left of the opposition in Russia without endangering it, and to those in exile? You mentioned weak language from the West in some situations. Concretely, just what do you think of one or two steps that you think would be particularly helpful for the opposition inside Russia and opposition in exile?
Well, it's very, very few things that can be done to help people in Russia, unfortunately. But what I think is important to use yes, indeed, to use stronger language, to try to not just to expose this horrific events, but also to take legal action. This is what, as a lawyer, I recommend. We have still the possibilities to first to use interstate mechanisms like International Court of Justice, the court that Russia is bound to respect. It cannot ignore that. I particularly have in mind Convention Against Torture. This is the jurisdictional possibility to bring Russian state to the International Court of Justice. This the step that was made by Netherlands and Canada in case of Assad regime in Syria. There are other options, but I think it's most realistic avenue. Criminal responsibility, I think it's also something that states can do. Despite all this multiple cases of commission of crimes against international law by Russian state agents, we have not had any case so far against Russian official or military. So the states, especially those who have appropriate legal framework to initiate the cases on the universal jurisdiction basis, should create such precedents. It would be enormously important and would be really step in the right direction. And I'm convinced that there are such people in the countries, in the Western countries, who can be at least, against them, there are at least credible allegations of commission of crimes, in particularly the war against Ukraine or in Russian domestic context. That's something the states can do to send a stronger signal, not just words, but action, at least legal action. And it's important to remember that it's not just right of the states, but also to some extent their obligations, at least moral obligations, sometimes legal obligations. It also, of course, should be measures to protect especially vulnerable persons, such as political activists, such as members of LGBTQ plus community, which are now subject to horrific treatment, and there are really grounds to believe that it could be worse. Situation is worsening. So, of course, the persons who conscientious objectors, persons who refuse to fight in this illegal war of aggression, and this is important to make a point that certain international law provides for such protection. It's not just individual choice of the states, and this is, I think, it's important, because if people in Russia would feel absolutely, helpless, if they decided to break with the regime, they will not have any chance to get support. I think it's a very bad message. It's a very bad message, and of course, I'm not saying that it's also immoral and illegal in many cases. But this is something that should be done. It should be clear what is appropriate message, that people who really should be protected, the groups which are targeted by the regime should receive international protection and support. It's not about millions of potential, refugees and flags. It's quite, I think, realistic to do this. The price of sacrificing of these people would be much higher. In case it would be not just losing, potential hope, the agents of change, but it would be also moral defeat, because if those values are just for the privileged people, if these values are just words and not actions, it would create very, very, very little incentive to fight for these values. We need to be prepared, and it means we need to work on scenarios. We need to understand what we want from each other, what is kind of conditions for reintroduction of Russia to the international community, and what would be, positive incentive. We need more understanding of what can be future of this country, and for that reason, of course, Russians should do their job as well. They need to not just to have, this talk about, problems and current difficulties is not enough. We need to present also the agenda for the future, and I hope it would be the right way, and the job would be done in this direction. So at least I see some positive changes. I need that the people start to talk about that. Even in the current horrible conditions of war, we are talking about the future, about for example, how the constitution of Russia should be changed or replaced by a workable document. What to do with the judicial system? This is, I think, is a key thing, given the current backlash and the degradation of judiciary. What should be foreign relations? What should be position of Russia in the world? That's all should be discussed before we will have this window of opportunities, and we should not miss this chance again.
Gleb Bogusz, thank you very much. Really appreciate the thoughtful reflections, and wish you luck going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode was co-hosted and produced by me, Paris Shah, and Viola Ganger, with help from Clara Apt. Our theme song is The Parade by Hey Pluto. Special thanks to Gleb Bogusz, Natalia Arnaud, and Anna Veduta of the Free Russia Foundation for help in arranging this interview. You can read all of Just Security's coverage of Russia and analysis of Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.